Welcome back, everyone. This past weekend, we had Playtest 7 for the infantry combat overhaul mechanics that are being introduced to Squad. So let's talk a little bit about what they've updated and what we've seen and overall impressions. But before we get to that, be sure to hit the subscribe button, leave a like, and drop a comment down below. Did you play Playtest 7? If so, what did you think? Probably one of the most exciting aspects of the playtest was to be able to check out Sangchen Islands. This is a brand new map as a part of the Eastern Asia theater, and it's really cool. For some reason, this takes me to the old Battlefield days, but taking a look at this, you might think, well, islands are going to cut down on playable area, but it really doesn't. This map feels large, despite not being maybe the biggest map in the game. It has so many different points of interest with different warehouses, different industrial areas, and some villages, along with a massive factory in the middle. And with the change in regions, this also provides us with our first look at vegetation from the area. While unfinished, as it seems to need some polishing and some textures added, this map was really cool to check out, and I'm really excited to see what this introduces into Squad in terms of gameplay, because I do think it offers some unique tests. With Playtest 7, we also have all of the factions now introduced to the infantry overhaul, including the insurgents. One thing OWI did note is that while most of the insurgent weapons may not have optics, they do have a little bit more kick in terms of being larger caliber weapons which provide more suppression. And of course, as you might expect, this doesn't exactly make it easier to operate the insurgents weaponry in the playtest. In addition to the insurgents, we also got the People's Liberation Army and the People's Liberation Army Navy Marine Corps added to the playtest. OWI did mention that the PLA are one of the 3 factions using the bullpup rifles, and those are quicker to get on target and more nimble in close quarters combat, but suffer from greater muzzle climb since there's less mass out front. And I certainly would not disagree with that based on my limited playtime and some of the stuff I got on the range. We got the British Armed Forces faction. The British Armed Forces are going to see less iron sights in rotation, which seems to be a little bit of a trend for authenticity with most of your conventional forces. I don't often use iron sights, but I could see how this might limit flexibility for some players if they were planning to go to iron sights based on some of the mechanic changes. Next up, we've got the irregular militia, which has been added to the playtest, and what they are going to see is the widest array of weapon types. This is unsurprising given that they're not really a conventional force. I'm interested to see the future of the irregular militia once the infantry overhaul is in place, because I do think they're going to be an interesting faction given that they're leaning so towards defense. Finally, we did see the addition of the Australian Defence Force, where OWI has reduced iron sights and included the Spectre DR optic as a dual magnification rifle scope. While I didn't have a lot of playtime, I didn't mind some of these weapons as much in the playtest. I felt like these might have been the easiest to adjust to that I've seen in a little while. In addition to adding the factions, there was of course a laundry list of bug fixes. Additionally, there were some general updates to the game, making some improvements and altering some of the mechanics and how things work, including some things to help prevent motion sickness, which I'm in favor for because there is some movement that is incorporated into some of these mechanics that have kind of thrown me off a little bit at minimum, and I could see how they might affect others who are more sensitive to that type of motion. Since we've covered a lot of what was in the update, I want to talk a little bit about the performance and the playback. First of all, performance was kind of the same as sort of what we've got accustomed to in some of the more refined playtests. For a lot of my gameplay, I had the FPS meter up and I kept checking it, and I kept seeing the dip in frames that most of us have talked about, especially when utilizing sights. Now, obviously, I don't want to hammer home that this isn't optimized and this is a problem because it isn't finished. So I'm assuming that optimization is still a work in progress and or will be incorporated later as we get closer to the release of these mechanics. But it is just something to note that this is still an area that needs some work. Now, in terms of my overall impressions and what I saw during the weekend, well, it was kind of mediocre. Like, there weren't a ton of great gunfights that happened, unfortunately. And maybe that was just by chance. And that's not all strictly on the playtest. Sometimes you just have your team is kind of out of position or whatever's going on that prevents you from getting into those fights. But as you may imagine, like we've talked about in previous videos, if your team is not working together and utilizing certain things a certain way in terms of transporting troops, having hubs in good locations, it is going to limit some of those gunfights. And you are now at a little bit more of a disadvantage from being able to just run and gun, right? So it's going to create a much different playstyle. And in those instances where you don't have proper transportation and you are forced to run more, you are at a disadvantage from those maybe holding a point or prepared for your advance. That's not to say I didn't have a few good gunfights, but it's tended to be small groups versus like a real firefight that I was hoping to get with a more immersive experience. I felt like I was running into 1s and 2s more so than a full group or full squad and having like squad on squad combat basically. Now, because there was so much incorporated in this weekend's playtest, I do feel like I almost need to take a step back and do another video where we go over more of my impressions of the play. I kind of wish there was another playtest 7 weekend so I could dive into more of the factions and have some more time. But I will say this, some of my concerns remain the same. Some of the mechanics still don't feel quite polished, which you can say, well, it's still a work in progress, so fine. But I do continue to worry about the pace at which things move, in terms of pulling up your scope, in terms of slowing the soldiers down. And that's a lot of it, right? A lot of it is kind of slowing things down and trying to make things a little bit more deliberate when you're doing pretty much anything on the battlefield. And pace combined with some of the mechanics I've been worried about, I just feel like I'm fighting them. Like I'm always fighting against something that's forcibly trying to slow me down. I don't have any fluidity that I would hope to have on occasion. And there's this interesting thing that I sort of noticed, that when you get into a gunfight, the mechanics are sort of repetitive, right? Which makes it a little bit easier to learn, but also more noticeable if things just don't feel right. And I tend to run into situations where no matter how much prep I do in terms of walking, running, waiting for my stamina to come back, I still find issues where it just doesn't feel like a smooth experience. I have better results with certain weaponry, as I'm sure we all do. For example, I've mentioned in the last playtest video that I've kind of mastered how to operate the ACOG for the most part, whereas some of the Russian scopes give me a little bit more of a problem. And some of that is certainly lack of playing time. Like obviously if you're on a playtest, you're playing whatever faction is available on whatever the few maps are available between the few servers that are available. It's a whole thing, but I'm concerned because I still see some of these same issues that I see with some of the new factions and some of the old factions, and new being newly added to the playtest and old being the playtest 1 factions. And now that we have playtest 7 with every faction added and things are still kind of all over the place to some degree, like we even had a bug this weekend where the guns were just kind of like moving, like randomly, kind of flickering almost. It just makes me a little bit worried that we're still rushing. We're still rushing for this end product that needs so much tailoring. More so than just my concern is that a lot of average squad players, folks that aren't necessarily, looking for the full milsim experience, may be at a disadvantage here, and in such a way that they're going to feel really defeated when trying to play because it's so different and it's so unforgiving. And I can understand the counter argument of this is for more milsim players, like more milsim players might play squad because of this, which could enhance teamwork and the focus on certain attributes of the game that get underutilized in some of your public matches. But I also worry that because we've seen all the factions in here, how much time are they going to give to polish some of the mechanics? Because now that we have all this in place, I can understand optimization now may be a priority, but I also feel like the opportunity to fine-tune things on a very small scale may be slowly slipping away. And I don't want to sit here and be doom and gloom. I think that there are great things that this could do for the game. I just worry about consistency. I worry about the mechanics operating smoothly and not making it so every gunfight feels like such a test of everything you know about the game. Sometimes you do want to have fun, and I've heard that argument on several occasions that it's ruining the fun of the game. And while we ultimately want to play this game and have that sort of milsim experience, we also want to have some fun, typically with friends or squad mates, and we want to win. We want to have those awesome battles. But I think we all realize that the game has to perform well. It has to operate well when these mechanics are in place, because if it doesn't, we're all going to continue to point out the flaws. We all know that there are things in squad that still need to be fixed that have been in the game for a little while. And I really hope that OWI continues to take the time to make this into whatever it needs to be, the best version that it can be, so by the time it's implemented, it's still not just a test. So with that said, I hope these mechanics continue to get the work that they need, and I hope that by seeing every faction in the game doesn't mean we're about on the cusp of release, because I think that would be a little bit of a mistake, because you may turn away players, you may lose some player base because of this. I mean, obviously there's some excitement that it's on the way, but you've also been testing the mechanics now for what, 2 months? So a little bit of that hype may have died, although there's still a large player base that probably has not touched the playtest at all. Anyways, let me know what you thought about the playtest in the comments down below. And obviously, I'm still all for getting this thing into a place where it operates really well, because ultimately this is one of my favorite games and I really enjoy it. And please don't just take this as something of like, oh, he just wants to be a casual gamer and play Battlefield or Call of Duty, because that's not the case. There can be balance. And more importantly, what I'm asking for is more about polish and making sure that this launches in the best condition. So I hope you enjoyed the video. Be sure to hit the subscribe button, leave a like, and I'll catch you guys next time.